Great. All right. Hello and welcome to Hiring with EDI in Mind, which is brought to you by the Talent Match and Talent for Nonprofits programs. Before I introduce everyone, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on whose lands I'm working from today, and we invite you to introduce yourself and acknowledge the land you are on in the chat. I'm currently in Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and our speaker will be sharing more about the land she is on shortly. My name is Debbie Reese, and I'm Talent Match's project manager, and I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Akanksha Thakur. Akanksha uses she, her pronouns and is currently the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Program Manager at TransLink. Prior to this, she was the program coordinator for the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Resource Hub at SFU. Akanksha's unique life experiences as an immigrant and settler are a driving force behind her interest in equity, accessibility, and culturally responsive systems change. For 3 years, she was on the board of directors of an NGO named Pratham, that is dedicated to educating underprivileged children in India. She was invited by the Canadian federal government to offer her insights on the new national anti-racism policy. Akanksha has a master's degree in equity studies in education. Over the years, she's helped curate inclusive curriculum for courses at both SFU and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Also joining us today is Alana Hibbert, who supports students as Talent Match's career coach, and Miranda Mislaney, who manages Talent for Nonprofits, which focuses on nonprofits across BC. And Shirley Yu is our co-op student who will be leaving us on Friday, unfortunately, and she'll be helping out with some technical support today. In addition, there are 2 ASL interpreters joining us today, Larissa and Liz. And just so you all are aware, we are recording the webinar, so you can rewatch it later or share it with your colleagues. I will also share the slides so you don't have to take extensive notes. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add them to the chat. At the end of the presentation, we'll go through as many of them as we can. But before I hand things over to Akanksha, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about the Talent Match and Talent for Nonprofits programs. So I'm just going to share my screen. Great. And there we go. Yes, I can enable that if it happens. Great. Sorry, just give me one moment. All right, so for those who may not know, MATCH stands for Museums, Arts, Tourism, Culture, and Hospitality. And the Talent Match program is a collaboration between the BC Museums Association, the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture, Go to HR, which is the BC Tourism and Hospitality Industries Human Resources Association, as well as ACE-WIL, the Association for Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning, BC Yukon. Excuse me. The program is funded by the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training. Talent Match's primary goal is to help museums, arts, tourism, culture, and hospitality organizations access student talent through co-ops and other work-integrated learning placements, so that those students can in turn help those organizations recover and renew. The program provides employers with resources to make hiring a student easier. And this includes information on funding, help connecting to post-secondary institutions with programs that are relevant to the positions or projects that employers want students to help with, and tips on how to recruit and onboard students into your organization. In addition to resources, Talent Match provides one-on-one support So you can email me a time to arrange a time to talk about your organizational needs. And you can see both my email address and the talent match URL in the slide right now. Excuse me. I can help you brainstorm for the project or position and find the information that's most helpful to you in bringing on a student. As I mentioned, Talent Match has expanded its goal to support students looking to work in match sectors. In her role as our career coach, Alana Hibbert has been building resources for students, and she's providing one-on-one consultations with them as well. She's currently preparing a webinar in collaboration with Worth, which is the Women of Recreation, Tourism, and Hospitality, and that will be titled Young Women of Worth, Advocating for Your Professional Development. Both Alana and I work closely with Miranda Maslany, who oversees the Talent for Nonprofits program, which is mirrored on the Talent Match program, but with a focus on nonprofit organizations outside of Match. Miranda will be hosting an info session with Eco Canada, which supports environmentally focused organizations with wage subsidies and trainings, on May 5th. Miranda will post the event details in the chat if you would like to register and learn more. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to give you a brief overview of some of the resources you can find through our programs, as well as through our partner ACE-WIL. Excuse me. When you're ready to post student jobs, an easy way for you to recruit from multiple schools at once is to use ACE-WIL's Post an Opportunity portal. This is not a job board, but once you fill in the form, it sends your posting to the schools you selected, and then staff at that institution will post your job. The form is pretty self-explanatory, but the most important part is selecting the schools, because the form will only be sent to the schools you choose. The ACE-WIL website offers a map of their member institutions in BC, which can help you decide which schools to recruit from. Each institution's page lists work integrated learning programs, and while it's not an extensive list, it is a great place to start. In addition, as part of the Talent Match program, I've been building simplified recruitment guides. Firstly is the simplified GLAM recruitment guide, and GLAM stands for Galleries, Libraries, Archives, and Museums. This lists programs that are most relevant to the GLAM sector, which includes museum studies, library and information technology, as well as schools that have anthropology, Indigenous studies, and other relevant programs. It's currently a little thin on programs specifically related to galleries, but I hope to update it in the coming month or so. There's also a similar guide for the hospitality and tourism sector, which includes 5 broad program types: tourism and hospitality management, adventure and outdoor recreation, event management, culinary arts, which includes cooking, baking, and pastry chef programs, and finally, viticulture for the wine industry and brewing. Both of these guides are available on the Talent Match webpage. And I'm nearly done building a similar guide for the fine and performing arts as well. And I've started to create one that will cover graphic design and marketing programs. In the meantime, however, please feel free to reach out, as either Miranda or I would be happy to research programs for you. Other resources we've put together include a general recruitment guide, which includes tips on what to include in a job posting and sample interview questions, and another tip sheet on how to hire students who can take initiative, tips on how to be a good mentor to your students, resources on wage subsidy programs, as well as many other resources. So now that you know more about the Talent Match and Talent for Nonprofits programs and how to recruit students, I will hand things over to Akanksha, who can tell you more about the resources that she built to help you develop ways to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion in your hiring and supervising practices. I will stop my share. Excuse me. Sorry, just having a bit of a glitch there. There we go. Sorry about that. And over to Akanksha.
Thank you, Debbie. I will just start sharing screen before I speak. I hope everyone's able to see my screen okay. All right, I am so excited to be here today. My name is Akanksha, my pronouns are she and her. I'm currently the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Program Manager at TransLink. However, that has been the case for about less than 8 weeks, I think now. So I have worked at ACE-WIL for well over 7 years, and I only just left that position. And so I'm really, really excited to be here today and to be speaking to you about equity, diversity, inclusion in work integrated learning. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the lands that I'm on. I am currently speaking to you today from Coquitlam Nation's lands, which lies within the shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I would like to respectfully acknowledge, that we are collectively on unceded and treaty territories. Unceded means that the lands were never handed over or relinquished in any way. Now, for me as an immigrant and a settler, a land acknowledgement really means it is personal in its own way. Because I too come from a land that was once colonized. And, this is important to me because I grew up within those systems of oppression that are still in place despite my country, India, having independence for over 70 years. And so a land acknowledgement to me really kind of helps disrupt business as usual. And it helps really recognize that these lands were stolen. Let's not forget that history. Let's look at and recognize the legacy of these impacts. And a lot of those impacts actually happen in the workplace and in hiring and retention. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you about that today. So I want to begin with, the project goals. This project, which we just called the EDI Resource Hub project, was essentially to build a provincial EDI resource hub that would be accessible to all members, or all ACE-WIL members, and that includes post-secondary institutions with work-integrated learning programs, as well as community partners who are members of ACE-WIL. And I want to acknowledge at this point that this project was guided by an advisory committee that was provincial, and that included folks from different post-secondary institutions, but also community partners like Mosaic and Diversity. And so this project was really guided by a plethora of experts in different fields, all of whom are advisors and employers of WIL. The other goal of this project was to really understand what are the WIL barriers, what are these barriers specifically faced by marginalized students, all students, but specifically marginalized. And then in response to finding out those barriers, really building resources with the aim to kind of help reduce those gaps and kind of provide more opportunities from an equitable lens. So one of the first things we did is to actually do a literature review. So we looked at the current research to identify what are the EDI barriers in work integrated learning programs. So for that, we asked two questions. What does contemporary research say about the types of barriers that are faced by students who are marginalized? And then the second one is, what are some evidence-based strategies and recommendations to kind of overcome these barriers and foster a more inclusive and equitable work environment? Now, we went in not knowing what to expect. And here are some of the students' top barriers that we found in the literature. The first one was that students reported, and this is all students, not just students with marginalization. So students reported facing discriminatory attitudes such as biases, stereotypes, and stigma. Now, the discrimination, if you're curious, that was based on accents, their age, finding out where they're from, also around non-white names. And these are just to name a few. The second top barrier that came up was WIL having kind of a one-size-fits-all universal strategy to their policies. And the aim was to really help support students with some more specialized supports. So one of the barriers that came up, and I'll talk a little bit more when we talk about recommendation, is that there were no specialized supports for the very diverse issues that come up. And that brought into consideration what kinds of supports do we offer as a WIL program, not just to students, but also our employers. And the third was the pathways for navigating WIL and its processes that lacked these specialized supports. So the students reported feeling very unclear around what to expect. There was a lack of awareness on what to expect in the workplace sometimes. And also, if an incident came up, or if a question came up once they were in the workplace, students were unclear on how to get those answers. Some of the incidents, if you're wondering, is, if I have a disclosure related incident, who can I disclose to and how? What are the ways in which I can report harassment or bullying? And so those were some of the issues that came up. These are the top barriers from the literature. Now, in terms of recommendations, one of the first was to provide ongoing professional development for all people of WIL. And people of WIL includes employers, students, as well as staff who are from post-secondary institutions supporting both employers and students. Now, with ongoing PD, some of the topics, those would include intercultural communication, power dynamics, bias mitigation, understanding common barriers that are experienced during placements by different types of students, as well as understanding, universal design practices, which relates to accessibility and students with disabilities. All of this really would provide a more deeper understanding of the multiple intersectional barriers that our students face, and also actually highlights the kind of supports that often the employers need to hire these diverse students. The second one was, the second recommendation is to provide an EDI review of post-secondary institutions' WIL policies and procedures. Now, some of the key challenges the literature reported was often addressed in isolation, as opposed to having, an overarching understanding of the issues. And so this calls for the recommendation of doing an EDI review of the programs, the policies, the procedures, even looking at forms, intake forms, how are we chatting with our employers and our students. And so, it really brings into question, how are we steering away from these one-size-fits-all policies and approaches? And what are some ways or avenues in which we have the opportunity to provide some specialized supports to address these specialized barriers for students and employers alike? And then the third one was around clearly articulating resources and supports throughout the WIL student lifecycle. And that brings up the question, are we providing enough supports to help both the students and the employers? Are we providing students with enough knowledge to take into consideration their safety? Are we empowering the employers to feel confident in hiring students with diverse needs? And also kind of thinking about how can we give out more information on requesting accommodations, reporting an incident, and so on. So the primary student-facing EDI barriers that came out of a survey, and let me backtrack a little bit, we did a student survey because we thought it was really important to capture the student voice to kind of see how they align or don't align with what we found in the literature. And so we administered a survey to students of WIL from 6 post-secondary institutions. So that included Simon Fraser University, Okanagan College, Selkirk College, University of Victoria, Royal Roads, and University of Fraser Valley. And so the primary aim of this survey was to better understand the experiences of the diverse students, and also to design practices to improve their experiences. And that way we have something to report to employers and also build for employers, not just students. So there were a total of 317 responses to this survey, and here's some of the top results. I guess we shouldn't have been surprised considering this was a top finding also from the literature. But discrimination and exclusion came out as the top barrier, as the students recorded that they experience exclusion on the basis of quite a few of their identity characteristics, some of them being their gender, their disability, race, religion, immigrant status, cultural background, and English fluency. The second one was really not knowing how to access the supports at the different stages of the WIL life cycle. The third one was difficulties landing a job. And this one is pretty broad, but it really came down to a lot of students from international pathways and also students with disabilities who reported difficulties in landing a job at the very initial stages of their WIL cycle. And then the last one was navigating these unclear expectations of what to expect when they're in a placement. So there was a bit of that unfamiliarity and a little bit of difficulty in navigating the workplace. Some students said they didn't feel prepared for the Canadian workplace culture and understanding what workplace dynamics might be like. And so in response to all of these amazing, important, and quite heavy findings, we developed a few resources, and what you see on the screen are some of the topics and the themes that we covered. So the first was we really wanted to make sure that we're building something to understand the diverse needs of diverse students. The second one was, now that you've understood it, how do you support the diverse needs of diverse students? Next, there was recognizing discrimination, where discrimination, because it came out as a top barrier in both the survey and the literature, we decided that, having a standalone resource just to understand and recognize some examples of discrimination in everyday life would be pretty important. Next was understanding power dynamics, cross-cultural communication, biases, and assumptions. And then we moved on to having a toolkit that really talks about thinking about WIL opportunities from an accessibility lens. And then the last one was an employer toolkit for WIL employers and community partners around advancing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in work integrated learning. So now yes, so this is time for a show and tell. I'm going to just stop sharing screen really quickly and move into the hub. Is everyone still able to see my screen?
Yes, we're fine.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So this is the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Resource Hub. This is the landing page. When you scroll down, you'll see a little bit, 2-3 sentences about what this project was, why this has begun, what institution developed it. Now that I've left SFU, you can, if you have questions about any of the resources on this page, you can contact Amy McLean, and she's happy to answer any questions in relation to this. And so the very first thing that you see on the Resource Hub is the final report. So let me click. When you come here and you click on the final report, it opens up in a new tab. And here you're able to kind of see, sorry, give me 1 second. And here you're able to see an entire report, and I'm not going to go through this, but the report gives you a very detailed, in-depth it walks you through all of the findings that I gave you an overview of just a few minutes ago. So whether that's from the literature, whether that's from the student survey, it also kind of has quotes directly from students talking about what employers could do better to make them feel more included. And so this is a final report that you can access, but the fun stuff is below. So you'll notice right away that we made sure to not have this resource hub be so wordy, right? We wanted to make sure there's imagery because once again, that takes into consideration how there are different types of learners and readers out there. Some folks need a lot more visuals to help understand. And so this entire page has a good mix of visuals and text, and you'll see the same thing play out within each resource. So if I open, and the first theme is understanding the diverse needs of diverse students. So when you go into each page, you'll find a short blurb. Again, we wanted to keep the text very, very minimal. And here you'll find 3 infographics that are built specifically to help understand the diverse needs of diverse students. So if I can open one of them for you. And you see it opens up in a new tab. Again, that's making sure that it meets accessibility standards, folks with disability needs, and screen readers. It helps when things open on a new tab. So a lot of thought has been given into even those little pieces on the hub. And then when you actually go, you can zoom in, you can actually download and keep this as a resource for yourself. And here you notice that even this infographic that's built for the employers, even here, we've made sure to have a balance, between the imagery and the text. Because this is EDI work can feel heavy. And so I'm of the firm belief that it's important to kind of maybe lighten it up a little with a few imagery, some color, and also make it at the same time accessible. And so that's one example of one of the infographics. So there's one of them talks about issues faced by transgender individuals in the workplace. Another is how to support international and newcomer students in WIL. And the other is issues faced by students in low socioeconomic status. I won't open each resource because I think I would go all the way until 4 p.m. if that were the case. But I wanted to also highlight that on each page, we've made sure to have relevant external resources. Now, the resources on the right are what have been curated for the purposes of this project. And then the external resources are things of TED Talks, YouTube videos, articles, because again, recognizing that folks learn differently. And that way, if you're interested in a topic, you click on an external resource and you're able to learn a lot more. So going back to the main page, and now that we've talked about, understanding the diverse needs of diverse students, we move into kind of supporting diverse needs of diverse students. And on this page, again, you'll notice a similar format. So on the right-hand side, we've built 4 infographics here. The first one is around writing an inclusive job description, which is a really popular one. The second is designing forms for gender diversity and inclusion. Another one around supporting students who request workplace accommodations. And then inclusive interviewing, which I couldn't believe it actually was the most requested resource from our employers. And so we made sure to have that in there. Maybe I can actually open one of these to, again, show you how there is a good balance between the imagery, the text, and all of these. Once you download them, we have made sure that these are actually accessible and screen reader friendly. So going back to the page, let me close that. Again, here we have the relevant external resources to help guide, what the further learning is really what we're trying to encourage by having these external resources here. And I think if you have questions around, can I download and keep these? You certainly can. Every page has its own copyright listed. And again, if you have questions, you can go to the main page and contact people under the Contact Us page. All right, moving on to the third theme, which was recognizing discrimination. And here I really am so proud of this resource because one of the things we really wanted to do was touch on this really important topic of discrimination. However, recognizing that it can feel heavy for some. So we, the advisory committee and myself, we went back and forth on how can we make this an invitation, as opposed to an attack. People can often feel attacked during this kind of learning. And so what we did here is actually develop comic strips. And let me actually go into full screen mode. Seems like it's still loading. I hope it loads. Let's see. Maybe I reload the page. There you go. All right. And so this is actually a comic strip, and the approach here was, let's tackle, because this discrimination can happen in so many different avenues and ways. Let's tackle a couple different subjects and ways that people can experience discrimination. And so you'll see the topic is right at the top. So this one talks about assumption making. I know it seems blurry on your screen right now, but if you download or if you zoom in, it's crisp and clear. And so once the reader reads through this very relatable incident that can happen in their daily lives, there is a little bit of a blurb at the end that really leads to some food for thought. And it also kind of summarizes what we're hoping for the reader to get out of reading this comic. And then at the very bottom, there is a reflection question for the reader to continue on and reflect, because, it's important to recognize that learning specifically around EDI doesn't just happen in one instance or one workshop such as this one. A lot of it is a reflective process and on a spectrum of learning and unlearning. And then we move on to the topic of stereotypes. So once again, there's a comic and a really everyday sort of incident that is kind of being discussed in the comic. Then there is a blurb that explains what's happening, and then leaving the reader with a reflection question. The next topic we decided to tackle is gender role discrimination. Once again, the same format. You notice that there's a reflection question here at the end as well. The next topic was around accessibility discrimination. And I think this is the last one, which was around invisible disabilities. Is that correct? Yes. Awesome. And oops, I should go back and just reiterate that there are relevant external resources right at the bottom of this page too. Now this one is expanding WIL opportunities with an accessibility, with an accessibility lens. Now the word accessibility, I think I should clarify in this case, is being used for all things related to disabilities. I have noticed in my few conversations this week that not everybody is aware of that. And so that's just a good heads up from and something I want to clarify. And so here within this page, there is a report, once again, similar to the project report that I showed off at the beginning, where it talks about this project, it talks about the survey that went into it, and the student, the sharing that students with disabilities did. And then there's an employer resource handbook that is actually, I would really highly recommend. It's been really, really thoughtfully created by my colleague Zareen. And this is a step-by-step guide for employers who are hoping to hire students with disabilities. And now going back to the main page. This last one is, it's the second last one. This theme is about, understanding power dynamics, cross-cultural communication, biases, and assumptions. This was an important piece to include because no matter what field of work, no matter what workplace, these pieces as humans are an innate part of us. We are not rid of bias at any point in time, no matter how hard we try. It's more a matter of being aware. And so this was more of an educational piece. So you notice that the layout of this page is slightly different. Here, there is quite a bit of an intro that really dives into this very first infographic around teaching you about what are the 4 influences to intercultural interactions and intercultural communication. And then at the bottom, there's a video that again enhances a little bit more about what is intercultural communication, what are the influences, how are you influenced by it. And then I love this video because it's not something that you would think about. Right? This one talks about some common workplace phrases that we often use And we don't really recognize or think about if everybody is understanding the phrases we use. And this resource was created because we had a lot of international students in the office at the time. And someone at a meeting said, oh, we should address the elephant in the room, and continued on to talk. And, you know, there was one student who came up to me and just asked, I want to just clarify what that meant. And it was such a great learning experience because this student had English as an additional language. In fact, it was their fourth language. So of course they aren't familiar with these common phrases that we might use every day. And so it really brought to my attention how we should be intentional in even our language, and probably pare it down and keep it as simple as possible in a workplace that is so diverse like it is today. And then the last one is a video on unconscious bias that is beautifully created, and I really highly encourage you all to hopefully take a look. And then our very last theme here is a toolkit. So this toolkit was developed by my team at ACE-WIL the previous year, previous to this project. And this was a toolkit specifically for employers and community partners in WIL, where they really wanted some help in understanding the students that are in WIL today, and also just what are some supports that can be offered to help us as employers. So this was a very thorough toolkit that was developed in response to that ask. Once again, I'm not going to go through the entire toolkit, but it really breaks down a lot of the different themes around cross-cultural differences and communication. And these are the themes that came up as a request from, here's the avenues where we need support. And so the toolkit, I believe, is extremely helpful. I have been a WIL employer as well, and I found it extremely helpful, and I highly recommend this toolkit. With that, you'll find also a glossary of terms as well as some resources. So the glossary of terms, once again, as I mentioned, everyone isn't on the same page with what certain words mean. So accessibility might mean religious accommodations, but might also mean disability accommodations. And so there is a glossary of terms that kind of helps understand what are these many words that are in the world of EDI today. And then there's a resources package. And I just want to show you the depth of these resources because, you know, here I am showing off a online toolkit, which is a resource hub. And even within that, there are just pages and pages of resources that are just in addition, if you want to go in and dive into some self-learning in your own time. And so there's everything from toolkits and guides to videos. There's books. Yeah, there's books, there's articles, there's journals, there's education and training that you can sign up for, some of which are free and some of which you might want to get covered by your PD. But again, so those are some other resources. And that brings me to the end of the Resource Hub. And now going back to my PowerPoint. So what I want to end with is just reminding all of us here that, you know, for employers to kind of stay competitive in today's market, understanding the diverse and intersectional needs of employees is quite crucial to success, because British Columbia is the most ethnically diverse province in Canada, with I think just over 30% of British Columbians that have immigrated to BC. And this is a stat from about 2 years ago. So I imagine that has only increased since then. Now, employers and community partners who provide WIL opportunities really have, you know, the potential to provide a really transformative and empowering career experience for students. If you utilize these resources that have been curated for you, it really would help get the most out of a short-term WIL placement, because WIL placements, as you know, are typically 4 to 8 months, can sometimes be a year. I was once a co-op student many years ago, and I actually did 3 co-op semesters, and so that was 1 year long. You know, I hope that these resources will really help with recognizing a few things. One of those is not all WIL students are the same. Second, here's how you can leverage a diversity of ideas and a diversity of work styles. Third is uncovering your own styles of communication, your own style of leadership, your hidden biases, your unconscious thoughts, right? Next would be recognizing the gaps and the opportunities in your workplace, not just for the WIL students that you hire, but also for all employees, including yourself. Because the mentoring that you give a student can really help in many ways. For you, it's an extra pair of hands. Immediately you get help with resourcing on a project. And for those who supervise the student, those folks are learning, valuable management skills. And overall, I think the biggest takeaway as employers also is that at the end of the day, you're helping improve the quality of graduates available to your industry. And so I'm hoping that the resources that are on the Resource Hub are helpful to accomplish this and more. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And I'm not sure what time it is, but I am ready for some questions.
Yes, and if maybe you could stop sharing your screen, Akanksha, and then if Shirley could spotlight me again, so I'm on the main screen. Thank you. So yes, please do put any questions that you have in the chat. I also have some questions from the registration, so I think I'll start with those and give people a chance to put their questions in the chat. So the first question I have from the registration is asking for thoughts on incorporating staff into the hiring process in a manner that is safe for them, particularly for BIPOC staff.
So incorporating staff into the hiring process in a manner that is safe. Sure. So, and I'm not sure who posted this question, but if I'm not answering your question, please feel free to clarify in the chat. Some of the ways to incorporate staff in the hiring process and still making it safe, I think would be one, ensuring that the panel of interviewers is actually diverse. And by that, I don't mean, and I think we're at a stage in EDI where I think I would love to start pushing beyond just diversity of skin tone. And I would think about diversity in the sense of accessibility needs, gender diversity. Let's think about more than just race and culture. And so thinking about having a diverse panel of interviewers, I think is a start. The other thing would be if the interviewers, even making sure that they're able to voice themselves, should there be a concern. Because I have often been in a position where, my director and 6 other higher ups are there, and I might have thoughts to share, but I might also feel a bit intimidated in that environment to share. So a part of creating a safer environment really is to kind of balance the representation in a way that everybody there would feel comfortable voicing themselves and sharing their thoughts and opinions. And then I think also, in terms of the hiring process, it's always really important to kind of make sure that things are recorded and documented. If there is a rubric to help guide, the process, that's always been really helpful. And I think the other thing is it really helps make sure that the discussion during the interview or even after the candidate has left is sticking to the candidate's skills and how they relate to the job, as opposed to any other things, because it's the other topics that can lead to lack of safety or an incident of that. So I hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you. So the next question I have is, how can we prioritize EDI when all our frontline positions are auxiliary with no benefits, no sick time, and no guaranteed hours?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So it is still possible to be inclusive and equitable despite not having these in place, because I think inclusion and equity look different and have many different ways of showing up and being implemented. So one of them, for example, would be checking if your workplace or even the place where there is an interview happening, are there inclusive washrooms? Are they gender neutral signs? Are they accessible in nature? Even checking for the workplace, is it accessible? Is it inclusive in its structure, in its physical? Are the employees able to physically access the space? The other would be, is there flexibility for hours? There are positions that don't have the benefits, that are front lines, and those positions typically have a lot of shift work. So one of the ways to be inclusive in those types of jobs is, are we providing, for example, caretakers, right? Are we providing some sort of flexibility, some degree of flexibility towards this part-time work? That's something for another way to be inclusive, and that's for one group, just caretakers, right? That would also be so beneficial to folks with disabilities. And another way that I can think of is, are you promoting your jobs in a diversity of places, right? Are you typically only posting on LinkedIn and Indeed and the very typical avenues? Or are you actually going into, those platforms that specifically advertise to persons with disabilities, specifically advertise to marginalized groups or BIPOC groups? I think there are several ways to be inclusive, despite not having the benefit. EDI is that big of a topic, and that's why there's so much to consider at all times.
Great, thank you. All right. So someone had put in the registration mentioning that there's excellent students from Mexico, hospitality universities interested in working at Canadian companies. And if they could be considered for this program, I will let you know that Talent Match, while it does help the tourism industry, we are working with ACE-WIL, so we do represent publicly funded post-secondary schools, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a look at our website, especially our student-focused website, and check out the resources there to help them find positions. I'm sure that lots of people in the tourism industry would be happy to hire them. A couple questions from the chat now. I have, can you recommend appropriate language or input for job postings and calls?
Sure. I actually would even recommend that you go, you can go and actually search in the resource hub that I just shared. The resource hub itself actually has a couple infographics on appropriate language for job postings and calls. And one of the resources that I created in one of the pages that I was screen sharing and showing actually includes how to write an inclusive job description, which the tips of which actually help with how to write an inclusive job posting as well. I hope that's helpful.
That's great, thank you. Another question from the chat is, what are diverse places to post jobs that are relevant and used? I've had difficulty.
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, it's a little bit difficult to. I'm bad at remembering names, if you couldn't tell already. Can I actually send these to you, Debbie? And I know the session is recorded. I would love for this to be shared because I think this is a question that a lot of folks might have. And I know I have at least 5 links and places where you can post. And so I'm happy to share those names. And I see somebody's already posted a link in the chat.
Yeah, that's great.
Amazing. Thank you.
People share. And yes, I can definitely, like I said, everyone who's registered for the info session today will get a copy of the recording as well as the slides. So if you're able to send me a couple links, I can add that to that email as well, so people can have a look there. And just on the topic of those job posting sites. I know they're not specific to accessibility communities, but our partners each do have a job posting page on their site. So that's Go to HR for Hospitality Tourism, the BC Museums Association, and the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture. And of course, ACE-WIL has the Post and Opportunity portal, which allows you to send it to all the schools, and they share that with their communities as well. Great. So yes, I see that Nadia has added a link there for one of the sites that could be targeting accessibility communities. That's great. But I don't see any other questions. I will repost the link to the resource hub in the chat. I put it in there earlier, but I'll put it in there again. Go. But we do have a few minutes left. If anyone has any additional questions, happy to have you pop that into the chat. Right, I think that might be everything. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Akanksha?
The last thing I will add is that I'm happy to also share my contact information, and should there be questions about anything that I've shared today, feel free to, maybe Debbie, that's something also that can be shared when the recording is shared. I'm more than happy to connect with folks and answer any questions that come up.
Yeah, certainly. Be happy to share that. I think the resource hub has a lot to dig into. I know it's a big topic, but I think that's a great starting point for a lot of people, and it's really helpful. So thank you for putting that together. Thank you for walking us through it today. Excuse me. And yes, thank you for everyone for coming and for your interest in the webinar. I hope everyone gets some use out of that resource hub and discovers the other resources that are on the ACE-WIL site. There's lots of information there about hiring students, and also on the talent match page, we also have a job posting template and a resource on how to be a good mentor, which can accompany those EDI resources on the hub. Great. Thanks so much. It looks like there's lots of thank yous in the chat. I appreciate everyone coming. I'm going to end our recording now, and everyone can go off and enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.